I've been under artillery fire by both mortars and howitzers, light howitzers, and sometimes the Russians would use several hundred grenades over several days, just 2 days, 2 nights, constant artillery barrage, and all they would get for their troubles was a single bruise. But there are certain things that Russia can still do on the level of a global power, and rockets, missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles is absolutely one of them. We kind of think of the US civilian population World War II, like they weren't bothered by the war, they weren't getting bombed, they didn't have food shortages, but they took quite deep cuts into their regular civilian life.
Welcome again, dear strategists, and welcome back, Jonas Kratzenberg. Jonas, thanks again for joining us again.
Always a pleasure to be here.
So, in our last talks, we especially had a short summary of your experiences in the starting of the war in Ukraine, and especially also on the regarding NATO counter-drone doctrines. Today, we would shortly dive into your experiences again in the start of the war, especially regarding all the volunteers, because that was quite interesting to hear about how that all developed, especially as the volunteer forces of the civilian populace especially had a huge impact on delaying the Russians' actions. And then we will be going over to the regarding how you see the Western defense industries adjusted for a possible bigger scale attritional warfare. And especially with rockets, you are very knowledgeable. And then we will get to a regarding weapon system that is currently being procured by the German armed forces as an example on a wider area defense. So to start off, you joined very early on as a Ukrainian volunteer and then even made it later into the special forces. Could you elaborate your way of arriving and especially where you were integrated in the first place? And yeah, basically it used to be a non-official unit that later got incorporated. So how do we have to imagine this all taking place, being organized and unfolding in the start of the war?
Right. So I joined, like most volunteers, through the International Legion. So International Legion was and still is not a unified body, not a unified unit, but more of a framework, a front to recruit soldiers and then bring them into a host of different volunteer units. So there's a volunteer unit in the SBU, well, several actually in the SBU, several under HUR, the Central Intelligence Agency of Ukraine, as well as the as ZSU, the Ukrainian army. Although the Ukrainian army ones are actually getting disbanded, the pure volunteer units are getting disbanded. And the way this would work is you would go to an agreed upon place, and you would be inducted, you would be brought into a base, and there you'd be sent off to wherever your unit was. So when I joined, there were two main units: the Alphas in under GUR, which was my unit, and the Bravos, the battalion under the ZSU, under the Ukrainian ground forces, and those were sent off to Kharkiv. We were sent off to Kiev, and later on to Kherson and Zaporizhia. And the way this worked was relatively chaotic, but it was also all under the umbrella of the armed forces. So we had contracts, we had weapons, we had official leadership, even though we weren't always aware of what exactly was going on and who were our leaders and what were they doing and where we fit in the broader structure, right? There was a broader structure that we fit into. At the same time, there were other volunteer units. So there was the Georgian Legion, for example, which was operating also mostly under contract at that time. And then there were also just yeah, I don't even Freischärler. I'm not even sure how to call it in English. Basically, units that operated, they were tolerated by the Ukrainian military. They didn't have contracts. They weren't even um, you couldn't even consider them mercenaries. They were more of uh, a foreign citizens militia of sorts. Um, One of those, I think, was Vendetta, which was operated by a a late gentleman named Mujahid. And they were operating in Kiev, for example, without contracts, without, not under the umbrella of the armed forces. And then, of course, you just had sometimes just civilians with guns that were doing their part. In the beginning, the Ukrainian government was giving out guns, giving out grenades just to random citizens who said they wanted to fight. There was actually a story somewhere around Kiev of some dedushka who had an ATGM in his basement, and together with his friend in the artillery forces, managed to take out an entire column of Russian tanks. So this was the state of the fighting during the Battle of Kiev and the general state of the war in early 2022. And during 2022 up until 2023, there was more and more of a push from both sides, both from top down, from the Ukrainians, and from the bottom up, from volunteer units to integrate volunteers into the armed forces. So, and that's really important for the volunteers themselves because, they, as official soldiers, they get certain protections. Not that Russia cares, to be honest. Everyone who fights is a mercenary for them, but at least into international law, the moment you are under contract with the Ukrainian forces, you're not a mercenary anymore. That was very important for a lot of us. The fact that you get free healthcare, the fact that you get regular pay, and that you have superiors who are Ukrainians is also very important, especially with legal matters. Was very important for most of us. And of course, for the Ukrainians, quickly, the moment the war kind of bogged down, became more organized, and this fluid phase of the war in early 2022 went away, the usefulness of these citizen militia and Freischärler type bands, war bands, right, just faded. And this is basically what happened when, yeah, you wanna inject? I can feel it.
No, please.
So this is kind of what happened to us later. I left the Legion in May, and then I joined a unit which has been previously working with GUR, but was now on its own. And we were trying to find a way to join up, to get contract, to get put under the umbrella of the armed forces. And we joined up with another unit, which was this Vendetta. We joined up with Mujahid. Danilo, I think, was his real name. He died in 2023. His unit, Vendetta, we together ended up, after months of trying to find a place with the armed forces, in the special forces branch, volunteer special forces branch of the 59th Brigade, which was, it was official military. We had official structures, again, even if they weren't always visible to us, but we were under official structures, under official contract, and we're under a commander who was also not Ukrainian. He was Armenian, or he is still Armenian. Joined the war before the full-scale invasion, and it was, all under the umbrella of the armed forces.
Quite exciting times from the start. Regarding the interjection, that would only have been to ask you that you elaborate a little on how you basically moved on, changed units. You covered that perfectly already. And it is always hard to estimate. We can't make accurate adjustments on how much this especially, but I think it really, in the start of the war, we, for example, saw just civilians lighting up transport trucks, for example, of the Russians, on occasion if they had a chance. And I think we really can draw the conclusion that basically all this spontaneous volunteering definitely did a huge impact on basically bogging the Russians down, or at least delaying them in the start of the war. Because as we all know, with their fifth service of the FSB, they basically expected a walk in the park like in 2014, where they basically roll in, don't get too much resistance, and basically they ran into delays at any checkpoint you can imagine to any extent. And yeah, especially regarding the transport trucks, they really got problems. I think we all saw the recent video where basically that one offensive, they basically were using any vehicle you can imagine yourself to bring the soldiers to the front. And yeah, Louis Solion of the formerly French Special Forces did a long cycling of hundreds of drone videos, and of course worked out that fog helps very greatly, but also if you move by bicycle or by krat, by e-bike or motor bike, that can really help. So to explain that to some extent. But yeah, regarding the transport trucks, we saw that the Russians basically had to draw from behind the lines what they could, especially in the start, as their logistics were or still are very much rail based. So basically at the borders, it very much stopped for them. They seem to have adjusted to that as far as they could, but always since almost 2 years we basically hear, oh, the Russian war economy is gonna collapse and everything. And as every general does good so to hide his intentions to some extent from the regarding subordinates, yet no one saw it coming too early on the Russian side. But especially if you had asked them in like 2022, can you hold through like 3 years of war under these economic circumstances, possibly the finance minister would also have said hardly. But somehow they adjusted, and somehow still they have of course, of regarding advantage of population and industry, have still advantages, and especially in numbers in many ways. So yeah, how would you see the Western economies at the moment being prepared or being set up prepared for maybe having to supply or sustain such a mode of warfare in the future?
Right, right. You talked about the Russians, and like you gotta hand it to them. They were prepared. They had their national wealth fund. And Russia itself has a remarkably resilient economy in the short term. So like what Russia really struggles with is the lack of Western technology and Western expertise that they after the Cold War they didn't really bother emulating that the way China has, the way China has enabled themselves off from much expertise from the West and Russia. But in the short term, they're remarkably resilient economy, thanks to the fact that they are an energy exporter, a food exporter, and a net exporter of precious minerals. So that's yeah. But the West, it really depends. Who is the West? Who will be in this fight, and to what degree? So if we're talking about a World War II style of mobilization, where both on the battlefield and in the home front, people are full have full commitment to the cause and are willing to suffer any deprivation, the way even the American populace suffered deprivation for a war so far from home. It's very, very possible the economies could do that, even though there's very little to no preparation at the time. But the problem is that this I just cannot see this level of sacrifice in the civilian population for a war, especially not in the US. So like when in the US, I mean, when we especially we Germans, we kind of think of the US civilian population in World War II. Like, they weren't bothered by the war. They weren't getting bombed. They didn't have food shortages, but they actually suffered they took quite deep cuts into their regular civilian life, like liberty speeds. Women couldn't even get pantyhose. Sweets, anything made from rubber was incredibly um, scarce, and this level of the civilian population in the US is not ready to take these amount of cuts for any war. I think the war support, the appetite for war in general in the US is so low that anything safe for a direct attack on the US would change that. So the thing, and one reason why Russia has been able to so aggressively switch to a war economy is because there's not just, maybe not directly war support, but also a mass apathy. So worst case scenarios, the Russian population will eat whatever they can. They will accept to a degree everything, any deprivation that the war will bring home. They are ready to eat up much more inflation than they have over the last couple of years. And to a level that we'll never see in the West. The German population, the French, British, American population will never agree key interest rates of 20%, so we can fight a war in Eastern Europe. But that also it's also hard to judge these things in peacetime, because the moment your country is under attack, the moment, let's say, drones start hitting in Eastern Germany, the mood in Germany will change. The moment we understand that we're not necessarily safe under the NATO umbrella, the moment that we understand that, hey, maybe we can't run away from any war or from every war, the mood might change.
Yeah, very much indeed. Also, mood always could change if regarding attacks happen. I think we have especially first we have to basically note that there might be or there will be a target oversaturation for Russia in any case, even if it's just against Europe. So, but as you already also correctly said, there is not really much preparation going on. At the moment, we maybe got the Operationsplan Deutschland or Plan Germany with, yeah, protection of critical infrastructures to some extent. But yeah, there are not really industrial efforts being undertaken, and we I think we can structureize this to some extent. For example, if we take the highest grade weapon systems, no of the Western production capacities are currently being leveled to a point that they can really satirize the regarding needs. I mean, take the rockets of the US, take the European capacities to build regarding artillery shells, for example. But especially when we are talking about grid outages or even the destruction of major companies, for example, cross Maffei facilities, they might still be worth a shot. So what do we do at that moment? For example, might not be the worst idea for that example to be able or to prep to some extent that we have so many machine shops all over the country that basically that can be partialized or spread out in the regarding that you always have a backup for this and this. And especially if we take like all the production might of the West together, of course, as you said in the German version of the interview very correctly, there wouldn't be a problem of basically taking German Panzer Grenadiers into Swedish FPVs, not FPVs, infantry fighting vehicles, for example. And one thing I would like to interject shortly, which is not so well known, but is really interesting to know in regarding suffering of the civilian population. I think to recall that especially in the US and maybe Britain included during World War II, you had as many people hurt in the industries as you had combat casualties on the front, for example. Hundreds of thousands as well. So that is always a factor. Hopefully, modern industrial standards will prevent this by now. But yeah, the regarding how to say Bereitschaft, the regarding readiness, the regarding mood, or yeah, has to be activated to some extent for that. And yeah, you are very much into the topic of rockets and reaches on that. If you could give us a little outlook on that, very to maybe pivot back to this point, especially as we already stated that the Patriot and all that very enhanced stuff for air defense, there is not really the production capacity at the moment to sustain such a war. So maybe you can elaborate on your findings in this regard for a start, and then we close out with a regarding area defense approaches in the future.
Right. So there are the Russian army is a meme at this point, but there are certain things that Russia can still do on the level of a global power, and rockets, missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles is absolutely one of them. And especially when we talk about Germany and Western Europe, that is the main threat. And the main threat, of course, is, as you said, oversaturation. So Russia now produces 5,000 drones a month and about 250 missiles of varying sorts. And there we talk mostly about cruise missiles like the Ha-101, Ha-55, and short-range, medium range ballistic missiles like the Kinjal, which is, early generation hypersonic ballistic missile. And which is the other one? Zircon, which is ship-launched. And those are the weapons that can realistically threaten Germany and beyond. So Poland, of course, if we're talking about the classic scenario of a brawl in the Baltics or Moldova, Baltics, Poland, Moldova, those are going to be the things that we have to look out for. And in that case, Poland would be right on the border. They would have to deal with the full arsenal of the Russian army. But most of Russia's most capable weapons, like Zircon, Tochka, господи, OTRK, Боже, the SRBMs from Russia, I completely forgot their name. Yeah.
Same here. They got a wide range of, and especially there are some remarks that they might be building stockpiles again, especially as with armored vehicles, for example. We ever see them ever more rare on the front lines, and it seems so that the regular units are being stocked up quite efficiently again at the moment, for example.
Yeah. Iskander was the thing. I just had to Google it. Yeah. So, Poland will have to deal with, and the tactical, on the tactical level, will have to deal with Iskander, Zircon, and Kinjal, the hypersonic ballistic missile threats. But mainly Germany will have to deal with drones, drones of 2,000 kilometers. So just for the viewer, for the visualization, it's about 2,000 kilometers from Kiev. With 2,000 kilometer range, you can basically cover the entirety of Germany, or in Belarus. Let's say from Minsk, you can basically cover the entirety of Germany with 2,000 kilometer range. And the Russians have several missiles, both air launched, ground launched, ship launched. Although after Finland and Sweden, the Baltic Sea is basically not Lake NATO, so there's no aside from maybe a submarine popping up close to German shores, close to the Ostsee shore, and launching anti-ship missiles. There's really no threat coming there. So And these missiles are relatively easy to intercept, especially for planes. So, when we always talk about Ukraine's inability to control their skies, to get, to control the Russian missile threat, it's because they do not have a really powerful, well-supplied air force. I think they have at this point maybe 50 planes. Most of them are third and fourth generation. They don't have a single 4.5 generation fighter, and they also do not have much of the technology like Link 16, for example. They have F-16s. They don't have Link 16s. They don't have their own AWACS. They don't have this kind of united air control system where AWACS, ground control systems, civilian control systems, AA, and fighter planes are all connected in the same combat management system. So we have that, and this will allow us, at least in the first stage of the war, to deal with the Russian drone and ballistic missile threat. Cruise missile threat. The problem becomes that this is only a temporary solution, because even the cheapest interceptors cost tens of thousands of dollars and can only be produced at a snail's pace. The AIM-9 or AIM-7 Iris-T, the air and ground launched version is very effective, way too slow to produce. So really what we have to keep in mind is our Air Force is only the first step. It is only the first temporary solution to buy us time to invest in economical solutions. So, and they don't have to be just as cost effective as Russia's drones, of course, because we have to keep in mind the combined industrial output of a European war economy is several times that of a Russian war economy. So even if we spend 100,000 on a drone interceptor, that is not a problem, because the European economy is this much larger than the Russian economy.
Coming back to biggest bang for your buck, we of course would prefer regarding modular and cost-effective versions, but at the moment it is really like a big steep disadvantage basically in regards of what the Russians are paying and what we are paying for interceptor, but especially the limitations of the regarding supply chains or the overall production capacity is really a big issue at the moment. So not even only taking the regarding interceptors into account, but also taking ballistic and cruise missiles, as you elaborated in the German version, for example, when we take what the Russians have in their arsenal and what if they get, for example, an isolated EU has in regarding of wider range cruise missiles, it is quite bleak momentarily.
Yeah, if we're talking about dealing damage back, that's that's a no. First of the arsenal is extremely thin. I think the only ground-launched cruise missile that we have is the American Typhoon, and that is experimental. I think there's like 4 launchers, or maybe 4 batteries. 4 batteries, 4 companies equipped as of now. This is same with the French. Also have a type of Typhoon missile, but that is also ship launched. And then, that's okay. I guess you could park ships in Lake NATO and fire past St. Petersburg. But we have no long-range ballistic missiles. Germany has, the longest range missiles we have is the Taurus with 600 kilometers, 650 kilometers. Considering the Russians still have quite a hefty battery of AA, we probably won't be able to venture deep into Russian territories with our fighters. So, that's going to be difficult. But at the same time, the thing is, it's not an issue of what we can, it's an issue of what we are willing to do. Because the thing is, when the war breaks out, it's not an actual problem for us to go to Ukraine, grab people with the know-how, people like from Firepoint, and start producing Ukrainian long-range drones en masse. It's not hard to come up with cheap long-range fires to counter, basically a European answer to the Russian Shahids. We can talk about how it's a shame that it's not being done already, and there should at least be more research into it. But what you have to keep in mind, I think a big issue, a big factor for Europe right now is we have no idea when the war will come. It might come in 2 years, it might come in 10, it might come in 50, it might never come at all. And then the question is, will, like, all the technology that we need to invest into, we don't know where it's going. We don't know if it will be effective by the time the war breaks out, which might be, like I said, in 10 years. Then drones, at least the drones that are being used right now, might be obsolete. So there's no point stockpiling 100,000 FP1, FP2 drones if the war takes a different turn. And I think one system that is already being affected by this, and of course it's of course the fucking system we invest into, is traditional short-range air defense, traditional self-propelled anti-air. Germany, we have a Rahmenvertrag, a framework proposal for, I think, 600 or 650 Skyranger, and I've been quite vocal about my opposition to Skyranger. I don't think it's a bad system, but I think it is still anachronistic, because, and when the war started in 2022, when the Shahed threat became real, I was a big proponent of gun-based AA. I was very happy to see a lot of Gepards be reactivated, and in 2023, 2022, 23, and even starting 2024, they were very effective. They're very effective systems at dealing with strategic drones, specifically Shahids. They at least the legacy system, like the Russian Pantsir and the Gepard, have been very, very poor against FPV drones. We, like, not a week, not a month goes by without another compilation of GUR taking out several Pantsir systems somewhere in the east or in Crimea. And in 2022, before the Shahed threat became overwhelming, there were a lot of hits on Ukrainian short-range air defense system, including a Gepard, by drones, where we're kind of incredulous. Like, this is this is supposed to detect planes and helicopters from 10 kilometers away, and yet a little shitty Lancet just takes it out. How can that be? Turns out it's quite easy.
Yeah, this I have seen that, and this is always like war accelerates technological innovation development, and the Ukrainians are now becoming quite effective with setting up a smaller Querschnitt, smaller scale radars who are capable of targeting this and that. But yeah, especially regarding overall drone defense, it has to become more versatile and not even accounting for the swarming effect right now. As I already said, I hope that the Lafette of Skyranger is quite versatile to go around. Especially, what were you saying? How many drones the Ukrainians sometimes use on a single tank? In dozens, it was sometimes.
I think the record was 100 something, 110 drones. According to Michael Kaufman, I think the how's it called? The average for the Black Barns, the Mad Max wagons, is 30 to 70 for one tank. And the Ukrainians are happy. They're happy to use that amount of drones because they can produce them. I think the Ukrainians alone is not what they get from outside. alone is, I think it's 1 million a month at this point. I've checked. Maybe it's just 400,000 a month, but I think they're at this point they're up to 1 million a month. And when you talk to the drone system specialists, usually about 1 in 5, 1 in 6 drones produced will net a kill. Mostly on infantry at this point, but that is incredible. That is an incredible rate. That is insane. Could you imagine this for artillery?
Exactly. Yeah.
1 in 5.
That would be quite a comparison. Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
yeah. I've been under artillery fire by both mortars and howitzers, light howitzers, and sometimes the Russians would use several hundred grenades over several days, just 2 days, 2 nights, constant artillery barrage, and all they would get for their troubles was a single bruise. They wouldn't even hit anyone. They wouldn't even get shrapnel. And no, so imagine what they could have achieved with 200-300 drones on that same target.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I once again partly go a little against your recent statement. Yeah, it might not be opportune to, or might have to do an overhaul or anything, but if we get like a few 100,000 solid quadrocopter frames for now, for example, yes, definitely in like 10 years we would have to exchange some of the electronics, or some of the sensors might become better, but it would still give a regarding timely advantage to some extent, because I think some of the base layer of the ground structure of the things does not change too much. Yes, regarding guidance, the countermeasures and everything, but any timely advantage you have in the start. And circling back to the regarding defense, I already said I think that modern air defense platoon basically has to be a mixture of so many different kinds of weapon systems, where especially a Sky Ranger and the Gepard alone are not enough nearly. When we go now to the individual soldiers level, I think the best approach we have is shotguns, and regarding 40 millimeter inserts, as I mentioned with the counter drone series we made with our insert for the 40 millimeter with the bolter, that is like 8 loads of a 1276 downing up to 150 meters. And yeah, if you have like 70 drones attacking your tank, you hopefully have like 50 infantry standing around, but still it might help a little to some extent. And especially in rear area protection, I really see big necessity for this, because the Ukrainians already managed it very successfully by basically a plain freight container, then the drones activated, and yeah, auto-guided themselves into this and that, and that would be much more cost effective than trying to reach us with so and so many cruise missiles, instead of basically just having some sleeper cells, or yeah, even someone unknowingly transporting something and suddenly whoosh, and yeah, power station is down.
Yeah. You don't even need, especially with power stations. So this was all the rage in 2022.
Yeah.
I heard that you don't even need explosives. So
Yeah.
even just a drone dangling with copper wires can compromise a substation. So if the Russians, so it does, we don't even have to talk about Russians. We can just talk about any civilian organization. You could just have a couple of ISIS guys buying themselves a 3D printer, 3D printing a bunch of drones, and then just starting a concerted attack on the German power infrastructure. I mean, okay, it probably wouldn't have significant casualties, especially with hospitals, etc., having backup systems, but it would be a significant disruption.
Exactly, and just this week I did an interview with Herbert Sauruck, who is like one of the blackout experts for the German-speaking world. And maybe I will blur some of these aspects we just mentioned because, yeah, I explicitly withheld myself from, hey guys, you just need a wire and fry it up, because we recently had that in Berlin that, yeah, it seems to be have been left-leaning sabotage that sent 50,000 households into a blackout for several days.
Oh,
And,
really?
oh yes. And
Oh,
that
what?
is why we shouldn't maybe give out too many tips on how to. It's good that we know, but we
In
keep that
general,
for our lectures.
like
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like when I think about it, there's so many bad ideas come into my head about how to use drones for terrorism. Like even just without, I probably shouldn't say them out loud. Like you don't need weapons. You don't, because like in Germany, it's
Yes.
actually
The thing is
I'm
that
not sure
always,
how to put it in
especially with
here,
our,
but
especially with our modern civilian mentality, the thing is the moment you utter such thoughts, you are already like, oh, 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 oh. But what the people have to understand that we are the guys trying to think of ways how to defend against that, and so therefore we have to project ourselves into the red team. Red teaming is, yeah, something you even are, especially in the cyber world, very familiar with, are even working in that field by now. And
yeah.
yeah, one has to consider every possible approach of attack to strengthen one's defense and make it resilient. While, yes, you are
Yeah.
right, the casualties might be this and that, but yeah, if you actually manage to take out so many power stations, that could become quite significantly very fast, because yeah, you might have this and that possibility to relieve the populace, but the moment it really is about the coordination and everything, and if you have to resort, for example, your firefighters and everyone organizing this and that, that can become quite bleak, quite suddenly and quite fast.
Hmm. Or I don't want to give anyone any ideas, but there's always planes. There's always yeah.
Always possibilities, indeed. So
Yeah. Wow, this got bleak
yeah,
really fast.
yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, got one thing to maybe hopefully close out with yeah, hopefully a little bit more light side. Yeah, we basically have to summarize that the defense dynamic thinking, the defense thinking has to become much more dynamic, much more versatile. I'm still advocating for the house rifle or the house shotgun, as the Austrians have it, for example. That would be quite a sight sometime. And yeah, regarding the overall versatility and how did it call it? Attributability? What do you,
Attritability.
Americans are calling it? That maybe we, especially in the defense procurement sector, should think about, yeah, getting more rudimentary systems that can be lost in greater quantities and easily replaced. And that is something really I also mentioned regarding a development proposal for a counter or a combat drone complex, where basically you could take one or two of containers, adjust them to your maintenance company, and then ideally have some drone models where you can basically switch out, okay, we take out the sensor array for reconnaissance and pack more load into it, for example. I think that is really an approach to go in the future. But to close out with a hopefully less bleak note, we recently saw some, yeah, peace proposals for Ukraine coming out, and recently the Europeans narrowed it down to 24 of the 28 points, I think. So as you know, I already sadly had to, yeah, forecast that like 2 years ago, that I'm with Edward Ludwig, that from the momentary stance, it will probably go into a direction where the concession is being made, that so much of Donetsk and so much of maybe Kherson and everything will go to the Russians effectively. So, what do you think, not necessarily of the contents? I know that they are very unfavorable, especially, yeah, to the nation you're living in right now and of your wife.
Mhm.
But what do you think where this will be progressing? And might we see a ceasefire in the next? I'm not too optimistic that in the next 3 months or something, but things are happening. We will see both sides. For even Zelensky suddenly said, yeah, we can think about this. So, what are your opinions and outlooks on this?
Plenty of war left. Plenty of war left. And neither side wants this proposal. I think the counter proposal by the EU, by the Ukrainians and the EU, is quite sensible. Um, you know, but those are also terms that Russia will not accept. I don't think there are any terms that Russia will accept at the moment, because the way it looks like is that Russia genuinely believes they can, and they affirm this every single time there's negotiations. They affirm their maximalist demands. The demands have not they have not made any concession compared to what they wanted in 2022 officially. And I think they're able, I believe that they believe that they are able to get this. And as long as Putin believes that he can get more, he will not agree to any concession, especially because it is not certain how easy it will be for him to start the war again. So when you look at any proposal that comes out of Russia, it is always the most important to limit army size, to limit or to forbid Western intervention, and to forbid any kind of NATO or troops by guarantor states. And it's the reason why the talks in Istanbul broke down. It's the reason why there has been no peace proposals since. There is always, Russia wants to keep the option to reinvade in a certain amount of time, and that is the most important thing for Ukraine. So even more important than the Donbass, even more important than bringing the children home, even more important than limiting the army size, is for Ukraine to bring the war to a permanent end. This is why they want NATO, because they know the moment Ukraine is in NATO, there will be no further Russian aggression. Probably. And if there is Russian aggression, it will be met by NATO. They won't be alone with it. That is and this is, and the West could propose things to concede territory to Russia, and to even agree to recognize anything on the Russian side, but they cannot. Russia will not accept terms that will leave Ukraine with NATO troops, NATO membership, or credible security guarantees. And this is for Ukraine the absolute deal breaker. So as neither side is ready to back down on that, and until we see the situation for both parties deteriorate massively, there's no point in these talks right now. We can just let the war drag on, let the war go on the way it has been for another year and a half. Wait until Russia is ready to come to the table, then we can try. And before that, it's a waste of money and paper.
Yeah, is quite, especially the points you mentioned are very much the deal breakers for both sides. And one thing one should always keep in mind, to some extent, to not to play the advocatus diabolus, but I have to stress, and as you also said yourself, we are not at war or antagonized to the average Russian people. The thing is that, we basically, or our politicians already fumbled many opportunities far in the past, and I think it's interesting that basically the original proposal basically said, okay, and all matters of the last 30 years will considered settled, and I was like, that is quite the claim, but to the Russian side, one also has to hold up, for example, that like in the early 90s, for example, they tried to get closer. On the other hand, they even made us a proposal of giving back Kaliningrad. Okay, that might have been a really big financial burden once again, but the talks have been there to some extent, and I'm, very much with you that it won't end soon. but I'm still staying on my position that it will go into the direction that what is currently occupied will go over to Russia, just on the basis that when you have active regional disputes or land area disputes, NATO NATO approval is out of the question. It has to be unanimous. So really far from there still, but that could be a basis, as Edward Luckwerk especially stated, that if these territories are handed over and that is considered settled, the theoretical legal options are basically there for joining NATO. So maybe if that part of the forbidding of NATO membership gets cut out, maybe I, yeah, would, as always, we all wish that there would be no conflicts, but it is very hard to estimate right now because, yeah, many have said that would be basically just a delayed truce, like maybe from, 1918 to 39, for example, because, yeah, you can say it is all settled, but still, at the other hand, you have so many strategists rightfully claiming that Russia is paranoid about being invaded, and they have no regarding significant obstacles, and they would like to re-reach them, that they are being able to waltz through Poland. That is quite hard to believe in the future. But yeah, on the other hand, when the conflict suddenly freezes, they still have a very well adjusted war industry. They can build up stockpiles and everything, and they are not wasting like the cream or the la cream of men at the moment. So yeah.
I mean, it's not just that they can, it's that they're actively doing it. So when we
Yes.
look at, for example, UVZ, the main Russian tank producer, they plan to produce 900, I think 950, produce and upgrade 950 T90M tanks, M1 and M2. And they also look to refurbish, I think, 2,100 T72 tanks. So, and on top of that, other BTRZs will have orders for refurbishing T62s and what little is left of the T90s. So it's not just that the Russians have the option, the Russians will keep mobilizing. And if you look at the Russian economic situation, it kind of has to be. The war spending is what keeps the economy afloat, even if they don't want to go to war, which is questionable. They will have to keep their war spending going, because if they cut off the tap of government spending, of government gravy now, it might have catastrophic implications for the economy.
As Perun so eloquently once stated, if a regime member has to face military practicability, welfare of the people, or own survival, the question is quite obvious.
Absolutely.
Jonas, thank you very much once again for a very interesting talk. And yeah, maybe again next year. Let's still hope that the suffering will at least tone down to some extent, although we might not still believe it at the moment.
We'll see.
All the best for your
I'm
family.
always. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Have a good one.
As always, as well. Take care.